But ESSER 3, you should be aware, was released. The governor's office had a press release on Wednesday, followed by the TTA letter. All of ESSER 3 will be supplemental. There will be no supplanting, no offset at the state level on the ESSER 3 grants. All that information went out Wednesday. So as we're looking at ESSER 1, 2, and 3, they all have pre-award granted up front by USDE back to March 13th of 2020. That date is the date of the National Disaster Declaration. So all three of the ESSER grants have period of availability starting March 13th of 20 based on pre-award. ESSER 1 then ends September 30th of 22. ESSER 2 ends September 30th, 23. ESSER 3 ends September 30th, 24. Easy way to remember that. ESSER 1 ends 21 plus carryover makes it 22. ESSER 2 ends 22 plus carryover makes it 23. And ESSER 3 ends 23 plus carryover makes it 24. It's just a simple way to remember these end dates. They do not have to be spent in succession. They will run concurrently. And so from March 13th of 20 through September 30th of 22, you'll have 3 fund sources that will be available to you under these ESSER 3 grants running concurrently at the same time. Again, they do not have to be spent in succession. And what you're noticed is that you received ESSER 1 last summer. That application was available and you started getting those last summer on ESSER 1. ESSER 3 opened yesterday for the application. ESSER 2 is still being held till those final decisions are made. So ESSER 3 application is available prior to ESSER 2. So ESSER 3, $12.4 billion to the state. Again, March 13th of 2020 through September 30th of 24. The subgrants are $11.17 billion. So these are 10 times the size of ESSER 1. The distribution formula, the statutory formula for determining allocations is the same as the ESSER 1 formula, same as ESSER 2, only it's a newer year of Title I data. So ESSER 1, ESSER 2 are based on the 1920 Title I data. ESSER 3 is based on 2021 year of Title I data. That's because the statute says in the most recent year, and depending on when the statute is passed, ESSER 3 under ARP actually updated the year of data to 2021. I'm getting questions already from the superintendent's announcement the commissioner's announcement to the superintendents yesterday saying my allocation's wrong. My allocation's much less than a neighboring district down the road with the same demographics. The allocations are statutory formula. It is the proportionate share of Title I that you receive. That same proportionate share is multiplied to the ESSER 3 amount. Just because your district is 10 miles away from another district with similar demographics does not mean your poverty census data under Title I is the same, and it doesn't mean you're receiving the same proportionate share in the formula for ESSER. My staff and FFCR double, triple, quadruple check these allocations. They're done by formula. You'll also notice, as they're posted, they are lower than what all these other organizations have estimated the ESSER 3 allocations to be. Again, those organizations don't have all the detailed data. They're doing a good estimation for a planning amount, but their data should have only been used for a generic planning purpose. The allocations posted by our staff are the official allocations. ESSER 3 has the same maintenance of effort requirement at the state level, no MOE at the local level, but there is a new maintenance of equity requirement at the state and local level. Same supplanting allowed locally as ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. There are 2 new plans that are required by the federal rules. The first one being the LEA Use of Funds Plan. It is required to be submitted to TEA within 90 days, and that is being done as part of your application process. That's why your application deadline is 90 days from when it released yesterday. And the second required plan that's in rule and statute is a safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan that's required. So the use of funds plan has several requirements in rule. It has a huge stakeholder engagement, meaningful consultation requirements. The rules even list all of the stakeholders that have to be considered. Just a heads up, if you haven't read this yet, you'll hear about it in our training on the 11th. It includes students. You have to get input from students on the use of this money. It requires the public notice and opportunity to comment. The plan has to be written and provided in an understandable and uniform format. To the extent practical, it has to be written in a language the parents can understand. And if that's not practicable, it has to be orally translated. Upon request from a parent who's an individual with a disability, you have to provide it in an alternative accessible format. And it will have to be posted on your website within 30 days of your notice of grant award being issued. So these are federal rules, and they also will be monitored. And these are all rules that were put out in the IFR last week by the Department of Ed for the ESSER 3 program. So the second plan is the Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services plan. It is in statute, also in the federal rules. It has to be made publicly available on your LEA website within 30 days of receiving funding. So that means within 30 days of getting your application NOGA. Both of these plans have to be posted prominently on your website. You have to seek public comment on this plan as well. You have to incorporate that comment and use that information. This plan is required to be reviewed every 6 months and updated, including the public notice and comment process. That's why I said earlier, you're going to need that policy on public notice, because you have to provide public notice on both these plans under ESSER 3, and this plan is every 6 months. You have to be reviewing it and doing the public notice and comment process again for any updates and changes that need to be made. Now, statute does allow that if you have a previously developed plan that meets the statutory requirements, you can use that plan. But the statutory requirements include the public notice and comment piece. So you have to ensure that you have done all the pieces, or you have to update the existing plan and do this process that's required in statute and rule. The every 6 months is in rule. The rest of this is all in the statute. So we know that planning in your planning process is going to be a big piece of ESSER 3. That's why I said earlier that you can't just sit down and do the application without some pre-work done, because you've got to do some planning because you have both of these plans that are required, and the use of funds plan is required to be submitted with your application, so that we didn't have 2 separate submissions, review and approval processes. So agency staff have been researching and learning a lot over the last year. They've reviewed like 75 of your LEA plans for reopening schools. What their research showed, and also showed to be the most often used strategies included in the LEA plans they reviewed, was to really the planning needs to focus on providing strong support to teachers, We all know that teachers have a huge job in front of them with students who are falling behind and being off grade level. And as students try to move toward grade level and stay on the curriculum, they're also trying to identify the learning gaps and critical skills that need to be covered early in the year to try to help the kids catch up. So the support for the heavy support for the teachers is one important piece. Also having rigorous instructional materials available to the teachers, materials that are designed to help the teachers and the schools and the students, but also the parents to be able to make up that learning loss and that loss of instructional time with students. Providing more time, whether it be through additional school year, summer school, additional extended day programs, extended week programs. We know there's going to be a need for more time. And also empowering parents, parent engagement. And this is talking a little bit about parent engagement a slightly different way than we talk about under some of the ESSER programs, but really focusing and realizing that, parents are the child's first teacher. The parent's observation of their child's strengths and weaknesses, their learning style, changes in their learning. And with so many of the kids doing remote learning, the parents are the ones that are going to be picking up some of this stuff because the teachers are not there. And so we know that we need to empower parents and give them additional strategies and information so that they can help the kids. So, we want to really look at a planning process that districts can use to help you pick the most effective strategies of how you're going to use this supplemental funding you're getting under ESSER 3. We did the big survey of all your COVID-related costs, and we had over 2/3 of the districts respond to it. We did the comparison, and we compared your ESSER 2, ESSER 3 allocation against what you told us your total costs for COVID were from beginning through September. And the ESSER funding is more than enough to cover what was reported to us, at least. So we want, districts to have a planning process that really focuses on the best use of the ESSER money to help the kids and to help catch up that learning loss. So the agency also has this learning acceleration framework, and it's a qualitative review of some local learning acceleration plans, and we saw trends as staff did this qualitative review of these plans, and we've looked and kind of developed this crosswalk at the agency in those same areas of supporting teachers, rigorous materials, more time, empowering parents, but then some other supports as well around facilities and technology. And, we've been working on, what can be effective uses, potentially effective uses for districts of their ESSER 3 money. Now, you don't have to follow a TEA process or use any of this information TEA provides. You can do your own process. That's totally allowed. But we have done a lot of work for you in this process if you want to use some of these TEA materials. So this planning process is going to be a huge part of ESSER 3 and getting ready to submit your application for ESSER 3. So in ESSER 3, one of the reasons this planning process is so important is they added this new 20% set aside requirement. So you must expend a minimum of 20% of your ESSER 3 funds on addressing learning loss and the academic impact of loss of instructional time. And so, they have two types of intervention activities that they specifically list as the type of activity you have to use to meet this 20%. And it's evidence-based interventions, not limited to, but they're really focused on summer learning, summer enrichment, extended comprehensive after-school programs, extended school year programs. And you have to ensure that these evidence-based interventions are responding to your students' academic, social, and emotional needs to address the disruptions and that disproportionate impact of the coronavirus pandemic on your Title I student populations, plus your homeless students and your foster care students. So you've got a bunch of different student groups to be focused on, and you have to have these evidence-based interventions and activities and make sure they're not only addressing academic needs, but also social and emotional needs. And this is all tied into this 20% requirement for learning loss and the impact of loss of instructional time. So that's a new requirement. The ESSER 3 funds have to be tracked against separately from ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. They have their own fund code. It's fund code 282. Again, you know, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, you would think they would all align, but none of those funds carry over into the other because they're 3 separate federal statutes. So they're actually 3 separate programs, even though the name is basically the same. No equitable services under ESSER 3 either. So ESSER 3 also has the same emergency assistance to non-publics straight from TEA down to the private school. School district has no responsibility to the private schools. I know you are receiving questions from the private schools about this EANS. The acronym is EANS, Emergency Assistance Non-Public Schools. I know some of you are getting questions, and that's because you're who they're used to working with. You're the person they know, and so they're asking you a lot of questions. Anytime you get a question from the private school about the services under this EANS program under ESSER 2 or related ESSER 3, we have an email address for the program, and it's simply eans@tea.texas.gov. I've hired 2 staff who are working nothing but that private school EANS program, and they will get back to the private schools and get responses to them. So the only thing you need to know about the private school program under related to ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 is the district has no involvement, and refer them to the eans@tea.texas.gov email address. Now, maintenance of effort under ESSER 3 is the same as ESSER 2. The state has to maintain a proportionate level of support for elementary and secondary education and higher education. ESSER 2 is for fiscal year 22, ESSER 3 is fiscal year 22 and 23, and that proportional level of support is comparing to the average of 2017, 2018, and 2019. There is a statutory waiver available, but when the MOE guidance came out a couple of weeks ago, it does not look like a waiver is going to be a very viable option for Texas. There has been a letter about the waiver submitted under ESSER 2 and no response from USDE yet. So this is kind of why the ESSER 2 funding is not been released yet. We're trying to get some issues worked out, but in worst case scenario, if they did have to do some kind of offset or anything off ESSER 2, which I'm not saying they are because I don't know yet. But if they did, they feel ESSER 2 would cover it, and that's why they went ahead and released ESSER 3 this week, fully supplemental to the districts. You have full control of how you use that money. So the issue is this proportionate MOE, where ESSER 1 was an expenditure MOE. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides to kind of show you what the issue is, because to me, these slides make it easy to understand. An expenditure MOE is comparing the actual expenditures of public education to the 3-year average of 17, 18, 19. So the first 3 blue bars represent 17, 18, 19. The orange line is the average. So under ESSER 1, the MOE, where you're looking at expenditure, you see the additional years are projected to be well above the orange line, so the ESSER 1 MOE could be bet. ESSER 2 and 3, it's a proportionate MOE. So K-12 education remains to be at or above the average of these 3 years in proportion to the total state budget. So right here in the middle is where we had HB3 $5 billion increase into K-12 education. So the blue line jumps up, still well above the orange line, and the proportion of K-12 to total budget in Texas government would be these black dots here. So you see K-12, we're fine. We think we're going to be fine because the proportionate share is still above this orange line of the average proportionate share. So what's different is that under ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 MOE, they tied K-12 support and higher ed support. So to keep our ESSER money for K-12, we have to meet the higher ed MOE as well. So it's the same chart. The orange line is the average of 17, 18, 19 higher ed spending or budget. The blue lines are the increases in what we think the increases might be. But again, this black dot is proportionate share. Now, because remember here in 20, K-12 jumped up 5 billion, higher ed increased, but not at the same rate. So the proportionate share of the total budget for K-12 looks different where that black dot is versus where K-12 proportionate share is. And a lot of it is tied to this $5 billion increase in K-12 education in HB3. So these lines are not any accurate numbers. It's just to show you the visual of what we're looking at, why it's an issue when they tied K-12 MOE and higher ed MOE together. And to keep our ESSER funding, we have to meet both of them. Now, the new requirement in section 2004 of ESSER 3 is maintenance of equity. And there is 2 state level maintenance of equity tests and 1 LEA level maintenance of equity test. My interpretation from talking to some people is that maintenance of equity was added in to somewhat address the supplanting issue and make sure that supplanting wasn't impacting high need LEAs and high poverty campuses. So at the state level, the first bullet is the first test for high need LEAs. There is a test that the state can't reduce state funding in fiscal year 22 and 23 for any high need LEA that exceeds the overall per pupil reduction across the state. So you can't reduce a high need LEA more than you reduce every other LEA. The second state level test is about high poverty LEAs, and it's similar. The state can't reduce funding at a higher level for high poverty LEAs than it reduces across all LEAs. So it's an equity test at the state level to make sure high poverty LEAs and high need LEAs are not being reduced at higher percentages than other districts in the state. But then there is a local maintenance of equity. And it's at the LEA level in the same 22-23 fiscal years that that per pupil spending at a high poverty school can't be cut at a higher level than other schools, and the staffing ratio on a per pupil level can't be reduced at a higher level than other LEAs. So 2 tests for maintenance of equity at the state level, 3rd test maintenance of equity at the local level. USD keeps saying they're going to issue maintenance of equity guidance soon. We've been told next week for the last couple of weeks, unless it come out while we've been talking together today. Haven't seen it yet, but we do need that guidance from USDE because the MOE guidance did, make some additional restrictions. So we don't know what the maintenance of equity, or it's being labeled MOQ. Equity is labeled Q. So the MOQ guidance may be a little bit different. So we really can't get a lot of detail until we get that USD guidance. We do know from statute that there is an exemption. It's similar to I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, it's similar to a Title I exemption that you'll recognize. So the maintenance of equity at the local level will not apply to an LEA if you serve a total total of less than 1,000 student enrollment, or you operate only a single school, or you serve all students within each grade span in one school. So you have no duplication of grade spans. So item number one, the exception for number one, serving less than 1,000 students, rough data we looked at, that's probably about 400 of you LEAs will be exempt because of your enrollment being under 1,000 students. And there's probably about another 350 LEAs who will be exempt because of exemption 2 and 3. Either you're in a single school, many of which you also qualify under number one, or you only have one grade span in the school. So you have like one elementary, one middle, and one high school. You don't have any duplication of grade span. So roughly about 700, 750 LEAs we think may be exempt from this maintenance of equity provision. People who are not exempt also still have the waiver option. You will have the chance to apply to USD for a waiver for exceptional or uncontrollable circumstances, like unpredictable changes in enrollment or precipitous decline in financial resources. So that waiver option is going to be available, but we haven't got any information on maintenance of equity yet. We're awaiting USD's guidance on it, but we do know the statute does offer these exemptions that will impact a lot of districts. Allowable uses under ESSER 3. ESSER 3 basically carried over most of the allowable uses from ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. There are a few changes. So the first allowable use under ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 was any allowable activity under ESSA IDEA, Adult and Family Literacy, Perkins Career and Technology, or McKinney-Vento Homeless. Under ESSER 3, McKinney-Vento Homeless is not listed as an allowable activity, but we do know basically whatever would be allowable under McKinney-Vento is still basically allowable because of the other allowable activities, but specific McKinney-Vento homeless activities are not listed under ESSER 3 as an allowable activity. Part of that is because there is a separate set-aside program for homeless children and youth under ESSER 3 that we mentioned earlier, that $800 million program. By statute, Department of Ed takes a set-aside of $800 million for homeless children and youth programs off the top and then runs the statutory formula to distribute ESSER 3 out to states. This homeless program is going to be split into Homeless 1 and Homeless 2. We already received the information on Homeless 1 just this week, and there will be another process to get the remainder. But that's why it's not listed as an allowable activity, although there's still a lot of flexibility to use those similar activities be allowed under ESSER 3 in other ways, but maybe not everything. The same way that ESSER 2 added learning loss, reopening schools, and the air quality in buildings allowable activities, ESSER 3 did add the 20% set-aside requirement in the evidence-based interventions for summer learning, summer enrichment, extended after-school programs, extended school year, and that those activities have to respond to academic, social, and emotional needs. So that was new. And then they tweaked some wording. Like, for example, there's a couple allowable activities where the wording changed just slightly. Over in the ESSER 3 column, the bolded print is where you see the change. Like under ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, it was planning for coordinating during long-term closures. It changed to planning to and coordinating and implementing activities during long-term closures. Including providing meals, where it just said before it said including how to provide meals. Now you're providing the meals, you're providing the technology, you're providing the guidance. Same basic activity, just slightly changes in the wording to show that you are now in, with ESSER 3 is paying for the actual implementation of the activities. One of the other changes is on the providing mental health services and supports. They added language about that it can include the implementation of evidence-based full service community schools under that allowable activity as well. There is one specific allowable activity that is eliminated under ESSER 3. It was under ESSER 2 and ESSER 1 both. It is the activity about providing principals and other school leaders with resources necessary to address the needs of their individual schools. Nothing out there I've been able to get a hold of to explain why this was deleted. People have asked, does that mean the ESSER 3 is not supposed to be targeted and expended on the school level? Is it supposed to be held back at the district level? No, nobody believes that's what it means. You read all the other activities, it's very clear that ESSER 3 is still allowable to be paying expenditures at the campus level. But I really haven't been able to find anything as to why this one particular activity was eliminated from the list of allowables under ESSER 3. So you're going to see a little bit of wording difference in a couple of them. The homeless is deleted off the very first activity. McKinney-Vento homeless is deleted from the first one. And then this particular activity was deleted out of ESSER 3 as well. So really focusing in on ESSER 3 in this week's announcement, you have two resources where you can find all the information. The TEA coronavirus webpage still has all the information